The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Alina stepped off the plane, dragging behind her a modest, worn suitcase that had clearly seen better days. The airport buzzed with early morning travelers, their hurried footsteps echoing against polished tiles. Alina stood still for a moment, gazing at the city she hadn't seen in over a decade. Her heart pounded, not with excitement, but with something colder, sharper. She wasn't here for pleasure. This was a journey long overdue. It was a family trip, or so it was called. Her husband's family had invited her, or perhaps, more accurately, summoned her, for a bonding vacation in a lavish villa nestled in the hills of southern Italy. The kind of place that screamed opulence, where you sip wine under olive trees and laugh over candlelit dinners. Alina knew the truth. This wasn't about bonding. It was about inspection, scrutiny, a performance, and she was expected to play the part. They hadn't accepted her. Not truly. Not ever. From the moment she married Daniel, the whispers began. That she was too quiet, too plain, too mysterious. No one knew much about her background, and Alina never offered. The family had assumed she was ordinary, unremarkable, and over time they began to treat her that way, like a decorative afterthought, or worse, like help. As her cab wound through narrow, vine-wrapped roads, Alina rehearsed the polite smile she'd wear. She glanced at her reflection in the window, brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and exhaled. The villa appeared like something out of a fairy tale. Stone walls drenched in ivy, terracotta rooftops, and a marble fountain that gurgled softly in the center of the courtyard. Birds sang, and the air smelled of jasmine and freshly baked bread. A scene painted in beauty, hiding thorns beneath. The moment she stepped out of the car, her sister-in-law's voice rang out sharply. "Finally! We were starting to think you missed your flight." Caroline stood by the fountain, arms crossed, designer sunglasses perched high on her nose. She didn't offer a hug, just a once-over that lingered a moment too long. "I brought coffee," Alina said, offering the tray she'd picked up along the way. Caroline waved it off. "Oh, just leave it on the table inside, will you? We're running late for brunch." Inside, the house was chaos. Luggage strewn about, shrill voices echoing as the family bustled around, ignoring her. Daniel, her husband, emerged from the hallway, phone glued to his ear. "There you are," he said, distracted. "Be a darling and help Mom with the kitchen stuff, yeah? She's having a meltdown over the wine glasses." Alina blinked. "Sure," she replied quietly. Started like that. Small requests, minor gestures, until the days blurred into a routine that felt all too familiar. She wasn't a guest. She was the help. They never said it outright, but every action screamed it. She was the one preparing breakfast trays while the others lounged by the pool. The one setting up the tables for dinner, wiping spills, picking up forgotten towels. Not once did someone offer help. Not once did anyone thank her. By the third night, Daniel barely noticed when she didn't sit at the dinner table. She ate standing by the kitchen counter, listening to their laughter spill through the open French doors. It wasn't just exclusion, it was erasure. And through it all, Alina said nothing. But she was watching, listening, remembering. There was an incident on the fourth day. Caroline had spilled an entire bottle of vintage Chianti on the villa's white stone patio. "Oh my God!" she shrieked. "This will stain." "Alina, grab the soda water. Quick." Alina appeared with the bottle before she'd finished yelling. She knelt, dabbing the wine, stone silent. Caroline hovered above her, sipping from a fresh glass, muttering about incompetence and the cost of imported limestone. That night, as Alina sat alone beneath the pergola, her phone buzzed. A name flashed on the screen, Lucien Monaco. She let it ring twice before answering. "Yes," she said, her voice cold and controlled. A pause. Then a low, amused voice. "You're really doing this, aren't you?" Alina's eyes narrowed as she stared at the stars. "They wanted a show," she whispered, "so I'll give them one." The morning after the wine incident, the villa was unusually quiet. A heavy fog blanketed the hills, and the normally chirping birds were silent. as if nature itself had paused to take a breath. Alina stood at the window of the guest room, the smallest room in the villa, of course, watching the mist coil through the olive trees. Her fingers traced the rim of her coffee cup, the same chipped one she'd been handed on the first morning. Everyone else sipped from porcelain. No one even noticed. Alina didn't mind. She had endured far worse. This was a test of patience. And her patience had limits. As she sipped, she thought of Lucien's voice on the phone the night before, of what she had left behind, of who she used to be. They had no idea. None of them. She wasn't always Alina Hart. That name came later. The real story began in Monaco. Before Daniel, before this family, before she chose to disappear. She was born Alina Volkov, only daughter of Arkady Volkov, a reclusive tycoon with a sprawling empire built on shipping, art, and private intelligence. A man feared and respected across 3 continents. A man whose name never appeared in public, but whose influence shaped the decisions of presidents and billionaires. Alina had been groomed from birth to inherit it all. She grew up behind iron gates, schooled by the best tutors money could buy, fluent in 5 languages by the time she turned 12. But her education extended beyond books. Her father believed knowledge was power, but mystery was armor. She was trained not just to lead, but to vanish when needed. Power, her father once told her, is not about being seen. It's about being known, even when you're invisible. But the pressure became suffocating. At 22, she walked away. Not from the fortune, she still had access to everything, but from the identity, the spotlight, the constant watchfulness. She vanished, built a life on her terms, fell in love, or so she thought. Alina met Daniel in Lisbon, where she was posing as a quiet freelance translator. He was charming, if a little self-absorbed, but she liked his smile, liked that he knew nothing about her past. He had no money, no ambition beyond small-time real estate deals. But he seemed kind. He made her laugh. And most importantly, he made her feel normal. She told herself that was what she needed. A simple life. A quiet life. One where no one bowed or flattered or feared her. So when he proposed, she accepted. She never told him about her inheritance. About the villa in Florence she owned under an alias. About the private plane registered in Zurich. About the coded security system etched into a single ring she wore only on occasion. She gave him a version of herself that was quiet and safe. And in return, he gave her a family that never asked who she was, because they assumed she was no one. Back in the villa, Caroline was loudly complaining about breakfast. Honestly, why don't we just hire a proper chef? Alina, did you even toast the croissants? Alina entered the room calmly, placing a tray on the table. She didn't flinch when Caroline scoffed. It's like living in a hostel, she muttered. Daniel barely looked up from his tablet. His mother, Helen, adjusted her diamond necklace and gave Alina a thin smile. You're a patient girl, Alina. That's something. Alina nodded, expression unreadable. Oh, and darling, Helen added, we need someone to drive into town and pick up the wine shipment. Do you mind? Of course she didn't mind. She never did. She was the one who did things. That's how they saw her. A shadow at the edge of their little empire. But everything changed that afternoon. Alina returned from town early. The staff at the wine estate had greeted her by name, the real name. Mademoiselle Volkov, the owner had said with a bow. A pleasure, as always. Your father spoke so fondly of this vintage. She had smiled, thanked him, took the cases of wine. The man had tried to offer her an armored vehicle to transport the goods, but she waved it off. She didn't need protection here. Not yet. Back at the villa, she found them gathered on the back patio, sipping cocktails and laughing. They were talking about her. Loudly, cruelly. Caroline. Is she even educated? I bet she's got some small-town community college certificate. Helen. She's obedient. I'll give her that. But the way she dresses, I just hope Daniel doesn't regret it. Daniel, hey, I married her for peace and quiet. As long as she doesn't start asking for anything, I'm happy. They laughed. Alina stood silently behind the hedge, every word piercing through her composure. She didn't cry. Not anymore. She didn't feel anger, not in the way they would expect. She felt clarity. They had made their judgment, decided who she was, and she had let them for a while. But masks don't stay on forever. That evening, she made a phone call. "Lucien," she said, "I want the car. Tomorrow. At the villa." A pause. "You're certain?" She smiled. "Make sure they see everything." She ended the call and walked to her room, where her modest suitcase sat in the corner. She opened it and pulled out a box she had tucked beneath layers of casual clothing. Inside, a passport in her true name, a velvet pouch containing a black ring inlaid with a code, and a gold card untraceable, limitless. She placed the ring on her finger. It was time. The following morning, the villa buzzed with the lazy energy of vacation. The family lounged under sun umbrellas, sipping mimosas, flipping through fashion magazines, and arguing about which yacht tour to book. Alina was nowhere to be seen. Caroline noticed first. She squinted over the rim of her sunglasses. Where is she? Did she finally sneak off to nap in the pantry? Daniel chuckled without looking up from his phone. She probably went to run errands again. She's good at that. At exactly 11 a.m., the gates to the villa creaked open. And that's when everything began to shift. A matte black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the gravel drive like a shark slicing through calm water. Behind it, a second car followed, sleek, armored, with windows tinted so dark they looked obsidian. The engine silenced. Caroline sat up. "Who the hell is that?" Helen stood abruptly, suddenly alert. "Are we expecting someone?" "No," Daniel muttered. "Not unless one of you ordered a billionaire delivery service." They all watched as the chauffeur stepped out and rounded the rolls. He was tall, dressed in sharp gray livery with a discreet crest stitched into the breast. One Caroline didn't recognize. He opened the rear door and stood aside, head bowed. From within, a woman emerged. She wore black slacks tailored to perfection, a silk blouse that shimmered like liquid ink in the sun, and heels that clicked with purpose as she walked. Her dark hair was swept into a low chignon. A single ring gleamed on her right hand. It was Alina, except she wasn't their Alina. She didn't glance at them as she strode past the patio. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement. Instead, she headed straight into the house, her posture calm, but unyielding. The family stared after her, stunned into silence. Did she just arrive in a Rolls-Royce? Caroline said slowly. Helen looked to Daniel. "What's going on?" He shook his head, lips parted in disbelief. I don't know." A moment later, the front doors opened again. Alina reappeared, but this time, she wasn't alone. Behind her came a man in a sharp suit holding a leather case. He moved with a silent deference that spoke volumes. Two more assistants trailed behind, one carrying a tablet, the other holding a slim briefcase. Alina stepped onto the patio and finally looked at them. Her voice was smooth, cold, measured. "Good morning," she said. "We need to talk." For several seconds, no one responded. It was Caroline who broke the silence. "Is this some sort of joke?" Alina tilted her head slightly. "No, this is long overdue." Daniel rose, confused. "Alina, what's going on? Who are these people?" She smiled. "Let me introduce myself properly." She turned to the man beside her, who opened the leather case and removed a single folder. Alina accepted it and held it up for them to see. "My name is Alina Volkov," she said, her voice like polished steel. "Daughter of Arkady Volkov, CEO of Volkov International Holdings. Perhaps you've heard of it." Caroline scoffed. "Volkov? As in the Volkov Foundation? That Volkov?" "Yes," Alina replied. "Among other things." Helen took a step back, visibly pale. "That can't be. That's impossible. You work in translation." "I did. For a while," Alina said. "But that was a choice. Just like being quiet was a choice." She handed the folder to Helen. Inside were documents. Legal papers, financial statements, business credentials, and photos. Proof. Irrefutable. Helen's hands trembled as she read. This says you control a 38% stake in 42, as of last quarter, Alina corrected. It's been a good year. The assistant with the tablet tapped a few times, then projected a holographic financial portfolio into the air above the table. Names of corporations scrolled past. Asset valuations. Holdings. Global subsidiaries. The silence was deafening. Daniel stepped forward, face tight with confusion. Why didn't you ever tell me? Alina met his gaze, her eyes unreadable. Because I wanted to know who you were when you had nothing to gain. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Caroline looked around, struggling for footing. Okay, but why this? Why bring in some dramatic circus? We're family. Alina laughed softly. Are we? She turned to Caroline. You treated me like a maid, ordered me around, mocked me behind my back. You didn't see a person. You saw someone below you. Caroline flushed. I didn't mean. But you did, Alina said calmly. You all did. And now you don't know what to say, because the story you told yourselves doesn't match the truth. Helen's voice cracked. We didn't know. Alina stepped closer. You never asked. There was a pause, heavy and raw. Then Alina raised her hand, and the assistant passed her another document. This one sealed with a crimson wax stamp. This, she said, is a property transfer authorization. The villa now belongs to me. I purchased it quietly last year through a shell company. The previous owners accepted my offer without ever knowing who I was. I closed the deal 2 weeks ago. Daniel's jaw dropped. Wait, you own the villa? Alina nodded. And you've been staying here as my guests. Rent-free, of course. For now. The weight of her words sank in. The shift in power was absolute. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone demanded attention. Alina turned her gaze toward the hills. I came here hoping things could be different. That maybe, this time, I wouldn't have to wear a crown to be treated with respect. She looked back at them. But you made it clear. That's the only language you understand. Her assistants gathered the documents and packed them neatly away. The chauffeur stood waiting, motionless. Alina walked to the edge of the patio and paused. I'll be staying elsewhere for the remainder of my vacation, she said. This place no longer suits me. Then she turned and walked toward the waiting car, the sun glinting off the ring on her hand. No one moved. No one spoke. All they could do was watch. The Rolls-Royce disappeared down the winding road, its shadow swallowed by the midday sun. But the silence it left behind at the villa was louder than any engine roar. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your chest. The kind that comes after a storm, when you realize the wreckage wasn't just external, but deep inside the foundations. Caroline sat stiffly on the patio lounger, her mimosa untouched. Helen still held the folder of documents, hands visibly trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. The holographic projections had long since faded, but the images of Alina's power, the truth, burned behind their eyelids. Daniel stood at the edge of the garden, staring at the gravel where the car had been. His mind reeled. How did I not know? He whispered, more to himself than anyone else. She lied to me. Our entire relationship was built on a lie. Helen snapped her gaze toward him. No, she said coldly. It wasn't a lie. It was a test. And you failed. Daniel flinched. Inside the villa, tension turned toxic. Caroline exploded first. She humiliated us, she shrieked. In our own space, with assistants and documents, and she staged it like a corporate ambush. It's her villa, Helen said flatly. Caroline blinked. Excuse me? Helen closed the folder and set it on the table. She owns this place, legally. We've been acting like royalty while playing court in a kingdom we didn't even know belonged to her. Caroline threw up her hands. You're seriously defending her? No, Helen said. I'm understanding her. She turned her gaze out the window. I treated her like she didn't matter, she admitted, because I assumed she didn't. She didn't talk about herself. She didn't push back. She just served. Caroline scoffed. So now she's some secret heiress, and we're supposed to grovel? Helen didn't respond, but her silence was louder than any answer. Meanwhile, Daniel walked the grounds alone, past the olive trees, past the fountain. Everything he knew, everything he thought he understood about the woman he married, was unraveling like old thread. He remembered their wedding, how simple it had been, how Alina had insisted on no guests, no expensive ceremony. At the time, he'd thought she was just modest, maybe shy. He remembered asking her once, as a joke, if she'd ever want more. Luxury, status, something grand. She had looked at him with such an unreadable expression and said, "I've had more. I want peace." He hadn't understood what she meant. Not then. Now he did. She had more. So much more. And she gave it all up for him. But he hadn't protected her. Hadn't valued her. He'd let his family reduce her to a shadow. And the worst part? He never stopped it. Not once. Alina, meanwhile, was back in Florence. At a private estate hidden behind tall cypress trees and wrought iron gates. The villa was smaller than the one she'd just left, but infinitely warmer. Here, there were no expectations, no sneers, no forced smiles. She sat on a sun-drenched balcony, barefoot, sipping espresso and watching the city stretch below her. The Duomo's red dome glowed in the distance. Lucien stood behind her, arms crossed. "You handled that well," he said. She didn't turn to look at him. "I didn't enjoy it." "I know." There was a long pause before he added, "But you needed it." Alina finally nodded. "I needed them to see," she said. "I needed me to see. I needed to know that if I put on the mask again, it still fit." Lucien stepped closer. "You're not your father, Alina. You don't have to use power like a weapon." She looked down at the ring on her finger. "I didn't use it as a weapon," she said quietly. "I used it as armor." The next morning, a letter arrived at the original villa, hand-delivered by private courier. It was addressed to the entire family. Caroline tore it open with suspicion. Helen snatched it from her before she could crumple it. The letter was handwritten in elegant black ink. "To the family of Daniel Hart. I hope this message finds you well. I want you to know I harbor no hatred toward any of you. I do not seek revenge or apology. I seek understanding. I came to your family with an open heart, hoping to be embraced for who I am, not for what I possess. That did not happen. I do not fault you for not knowing who I was. I fault you for never caring to ask. Wealth and titles do not define a person. But the way you treat someone you believe to be beneath you, that does. You revealed yourselves. I simply chose when to reveal myself. I will be leaving Europe shortly. Please do not contact me. Not because I hate you, but because I choose peace over performance. Alina Volkov." Caroline crumpled the letter and threw it into the fireplace. "She's so dramatic." Helen didn't speak. She watched the letter burn, the flames devouring each word slowly, like regret made visible. Daniel sat in their room alone, staring at a photograph. It was one he'd taken on their honeymoon. Alina laughing, wind in her hair, barefoot in the sand. He didn't recognize that smile anymore, because he realized now, it wasn't his version of her. It was the real her, unguarded, before his world swallowed her whole. And he had let it happen. The sun was just beginning to sink below the Tuscan hills when Alina walked the grounds of her family's vineyard for the last time. The soft soil crunched beneath her heels, each step a quiet echo of the path she'd walked, away from humiliation, through revelation, and into solitude. Between the neat rows of vines, her memories drifted like ghosts. She saw herself at 16, learning from her father how to gauge the harvest just by scent. She heard the laughter of old workers who'd loved her not because of her name, but because she worked beside them. This was her real inheritance. Not the money, not the empire, but the silence, the peace, that came from knowing who she was without anyone else's permission. And she had reclaimed it. 3 days had passed since she left the villa. The letters had gone unread, the messages unanswered, the calls ignored. She hadn't done it to punish them. She simply didn't want their apologies now that they knew her value, when they couldn't recognize it before. Back in Florence, Alina began to pack for her departure. Her assistant, Marco, stood by with her itinerary: Geneva, then Paris, then Singapore. There were board meetings ahead, negotiations, philanthropic ventures. The world of power and influence awaited her return like a kingdom waiting for its queen. But still, her eyes drifted to a worn paperback on her nightstand. A novel Daniel had given her early in their relationship. The only gift he'd chosen without help or suggestion. She remembered how touched he'd been when she said she loved it, not realizing she'd already read it 3 times as a child. Back when her family's summer home was in Monaco. She smiled faintly, then placed the book into her luggage. Some pieces of the past didn't deserve fire. They deserved quiet preservation. Meanwhile, at the villa, silence took on a different tone. No one said it aloud, but Alina's absence lingered like incense after a fire, haunting, fragrant, inescapable. The staff, once indifferent, now whispered stories about the heiress who had walked among them, unnoticed. Neighbors began to ask questions. The media caught wind of a rumor that Alina Volkov had vacationed under an alias, and her identity had been revealed in a dramatic family dispute. Reporters began circling. Headlines followed. Daniel was forced to resign from his boutique tech firm after investors questioned his judgment. Not because of what Alina had done, but because of what he hadn't. He had been given a chance to stand beside a woman of strength and depth, and failed to see her. He flew to Florence once, hoping to find her. She never came to the hotel. Only Marco arrived with a single envelope. Inside was a letter. Daniel, you once asked me why I never wear jewelry. I told you that when you've grown up surrounded by crowns, you learn quickly that the weight of gold is heavier than it looks. I didn't want you to love me for what I came from. I wanted to know you could love me without it. I saw your potential. I believed in you, but now I believe in myself more. Don't look for me again. Not out of guilt. Not out of grief. Learn from this. Grow. Change. And next time, when someone offers you their truth in silence, listen. Alina. That night, under the stars of Florence, Alina dined alone on her rooftop. The Duomo glowed like an ancient heart. Her assistant lit a single lantern beside her as the breeze carried the scent of lemon and basil through the air. She was alone, but she wasn't lonely, because she was free. Free from pretending. Free from performance. Free from smallness. She had walked through the fire of false judgment and emerged with her crown intact. Not one made of gold, but of dignity, grace, and choice. She'd been treated like a servant, spoken down to, looked through. But now, she ruled without raising her voice. She led without showing her throne. And in a world obsessed with titles and wealth, she had proven something rare. That true power isn't revealed with noise. It's revealed in silence. So what happens when the quietest person in the room turns out to hold the most power? What if the servant you ignore is the one who signs your paycheck? What if the invisible woman chooses to be seen? The truth is, respect isn't earned by money or status. It's earned by seeing people, regardless of what they wear or where they come from. And for Alina Volkov, the moment she was treated like a servant was the moment she remembered who she really was, and made the world remember